Hey y'all, welcome back. I'm Shayna Cersei, and I'm so excited to paint with you today for another watercolor journal page. And today we're on day 101. So there was a request from someone who said, could you do a whale? And I thought to myself, absolutely, can definitely do a whale, because I actually do this whale project with a lot of my kids classes. So we use a lot of experimental techniques when doing our whale. So I'm going to recreate this project, but in my watercolor journal. The big thing is when I give this to my kiddos, we give them an outline to trace, but we're not going to have that today. We're going to draw freehand right into our journals and then apply some of these experimental techniques. So let's get some supplies and get our journals all set up and ready to go. All right, so I am using a Bao Hong sketchbook. It's 100% cotton paper, 140-pound cold press. I'm just going to tape my edges. I have some tape that I used for my last one here that I'm going to reuse. I am going to make my edges a little thinner than the last one. I am going to be using my Core, Q-O-R, by Golden watercolor paints. I'm a big fan of Core, but not everybody is, and that's totally fine. All the colors I'm going to be using, you can really find in other brands. So if you prefer other brands or have other brands, go for it. There we go. All right. And then for brushes, I have a couple of brushes here. I just have a set of Velvet Touch brushes that I'm going to use today. I have a 10, a 6, and a 4. Then I have this tiny little detail brush, which is like just a craft brush. I have other detail brushes that are, watercolor brushes, but this one is here and it's been serving me well. I pulled it out a couple of days ago or a week ago, and it's been doing a great job so far. So no reason to change it up. Okay, so let's see. We're going to draw first. So get yourself a pencil. I'm just using this number 2 Ticonderoga pencil. These are sacred in our house, the Ticonderoga school pencil. Everybody loves them for all of their pencil needs. Any pencil you have, artist pencils or mechanical pencils, whatever works. Try to get something that isn't too dark or harsh, but I also have a kneaded eraser. Kneaded erasers are really wonderful and important to have. And I just learned the other day, I can't believe I didn't know this, that as your kneaded eraser gets older and filled with graphite, you can wash it with soap and water. I haven't done it yet. I'm going to try it. To renew it. So I usually don't have kneaded erasers that long. I usually lose them at some point before they really need to be replaced. But I'm going to give that a try. So a kneaded eraser is great. It's just this gray gummy stuff, and it will pick graphite up off the page versus damaging the surface of the page like a traditional eraser would do. So okay, so let's go to our drawing. Here is our whale. The whale, it's kind of not weird, but interesting in that you do have to keep in mind the widest points both this way and this way. You think it's going to be pretty narrow, but you got this fin down here, and the top of the nose and the bottom of the tail and the fin. So looking at the whole thing, it's like inside a big rectangle. Okay, so we have a big rectangle here, but we don't want the whale to go all the way to the edges. So I am just going to give myself a little interior rectangle to kind of work within so that I'm not going all the way to the edges. You don't have to draw this part out, but just giving you an idea of how I help myself sometimes, like plan things out and plan for space when I'm drawing. The top of the nose is going to be kind of at the tippy top of our triangle. So I'm just going to put a little mark there for the nose. And this is starting to set things in my brain. Let's zoom out just a little bit more. There we go. So that's going to be the tippy top of the nose. And then it's going to follow down the back this way. And the bottom of the tail is going to be like right here. So I need to make sure that I get all of this in that space. And then the bottom of the fin, here's the tail, the bottom of the fins are way down here. So there's like this big gap from, if I drew a line, this would be kind of the middle of my rectangle and this would be the very bottom of my rectangle. So I'm actually going to move the bottom of my tail up a little bit. So this will be the bottom of my tail, and down here, here, and here will be the bottom of my fins. Okay, so now I have, if you can start to visualize it, like here's the top, here's the bottom of the tail, like we just got to fill in the center here. So that's one way of trying to like help yourself scale something and make it proportional, is to start with just the edges and the corners. So I am going to bring this line. All right, so this line is like the top of my whale. And you can refine it. This is going to be the other side of the tail, and it's going to kind of go right off the edge here. So just a little triangle, and then this. Now we're going to do the bottom. It's going to be thin and curved here, but we're going to give it a nice little belly. And then we have this big fin up here. And then the mouth kind of comes straight down. Show you straight down in this arc here. So trying to take things, and here, you know what, I'll put this here for a minute. So if you have to pause the video to kind of take a screenshot of like what it is so that you can look at it while trying to draw it, do that. Okay. Then this is going to go all the way down here, like that. So I'm trying to get this in line with this. The fin is just in front of it, but these two sections should kind of be parallel with each other. And sometimes we have to erase, and that's okay. And then the other fin is just behind here. Right, so that is the basic shape. And then we have this mouth in here that really, the mouth and the eye, which really kind of creates the whole look. So that is this part. I'm going to widen this a little bit here. This is going to have all of these lines on it. And then the eye is way down here. And we're going to give it a nice hooded lid here with a circle inside, and then one more for the pupil. Very soulful eyes. And there we go. And then if there's anything you want to adjust, once you kind of take the whole thing in, that's when you can start to adjust things. So for me, this part is a little too wide at the top. I want it to be more, there we go, like that. And this I think is a little, I'm gonna just bring this down a little bit, I think. And then also I'm just looking at my eye placement. I'm going to erase that eye and I'm going to turn it just a little bit. And you can spend as much time on this part as you want. You don't have to rush. Really take a look at it as a whole. There we go. And again, I'm working in a much smaller space than the original one. I had to scale it down. Things might feel a little wonky. I'm going to thin this out a little bit for the tail. And I'm going to let my tail kind of go right off the page, just to give myself a little bit more space. There we go. And I think in the other one, this kind of moves up a little bit. It's a little bit more bent or bowed. All right, works for me. Now we can get into the fun painting part. So I'm going to take care of this triangle, or the rectangle around my whale. That was kind of guiding me to keep it within this space so I wasn't going way off the page or right into the tape. And I'm going to just change the shape of this fin to be like hanging down a little bit more. There we go. Okay, now I'm happy. So now it's time to paint. You can lighten up your lines a lot. I'm going to leave mine pretty dark so you can kind of see where I'm going. So there's a lot of fun things that you can do with watercolor that are experimental. And you can use things like salt, plastic wrap or saran wrap, foil, cotton balls, and you just apply these after you've put wet paint down. You apply these things to the surface and they pull and push the paint and pigment and water around to make really fun textures. We're just going to stick with salt today, I think. So you can use regular table salt. You can experiment with different types of salt. Some will be more reactive than others. I'm just going to use regular table salt in a normal fine grain. All right. So my colors for this, we're going to use a combination of 2 blues and Payne's gray. So we're going to use Ultramarine, which is a warm blue. Believe it or not, this has red undertones to it. And Ultramarine is a granulating color. So it's already going to give us a little texture just by being who it is. So there's Ultramarine. And then we're going to use Phthalo. Phthalo blue, green shade. And this is a much cooler blue, hence the green shade. It has a green undertone to it. And last but not least, we're going to use Payne's gray for our details, and we're going to add it to our blues to create different shades of blue, tones of blue. All right, so the first thing we're going to do, you can do this either way. You can paint the whale first and then the background, or the background and then the whale. We're going to do the background first. And the way we're going to do that is we are going to wet the whole background around our whale. So using your biggest brush probably that you have makes this process a lot easier and a lot faster. And you can get the whole thing wet before parts of it start to dry. So you might have to add a couple layers of water. This is where this type of project, when you're using very heavy wet on wet, 100% cotton really will be your friend if you have that available to you. So that's why I love this sketchbook, because it is 100% cotton. I can do heavy water projects in it. And that is not true for a lot of sketchbooks. It's harder to find 100% cotton. I totally understand that yours might not be. It might be 25%. It might just not be any cotton at all. It's cellulose. So I do understand and appreciate that. So this project would be great if you don't have a 100% cotton journal, but you have some 100% cotton paper around. That could be helpful too. Or give it a try in your cellulose journal. Just be mindful. You might want to do it in sections versus all at once. And honestly, this one, we're kind of forcing a lot of blooms and a lot of texture. So cellulose might be great, other than you're just kind of really saturating the paper, and just have to be careful not to damage it in the process. It doesn't take kindly to too much water. It'll get pretty wrinkly. Even cotton paper, when you're using this much water, gets, you can see mine is starting to bow up a little bit. Let me actually clamp it down so it can't bow up too much. There we go. Okay, so everything is nice and wet. I am going to go into our ultramarine. I'm going to add a smidge. Well, that was a little smidge too much. I'm going to add a smidge of Payne's gray to it. So now I have this beautiful navy color. I'm just adding more ultramarine because it got a little too dark for me. But I want my whale and my ocean water to be different. So I am going to make this a vignette, meaning it's going to be darker around the edges. So that's where I'm going to kind of put the majority of my paint. And you can see with my core, it's already starting to bleed out. This is going to be a messy, carefree process. You are not going to try to control it too much. All right, and then once we're about here, I'm going to rinse off my brush and just use water and my damp brush to kind of blend towards the center. But I want it to be kind of messy, kind of cloudy looking. And then for the texture in this area, we're going to add drops of water, which are going to create backwashes and texture that way. So you can continue while it's still wet, dropping in darker or more vibrant color right on top. Again, this is not a flat wash. We want it to be textured and fun and billowy and cloudy looking. And just, I know we're doing a vignette here, but I am going to add some bits of darker right along the whale in a few spots. And this is great with beginners and with kids because it's really hard to mess it up. You just kind of keep going and adding and let the paint do a lot of the work. And you really get to know your paints and your colors and how they respond wet on wet in something like this. All right, so that looks pretty dramatic, a lot of fun. Remember, dark colors, when they're wet, they seem really dark and vibrant, but as they dry, they are gonna lighten up. So this is gonna lighten. Now, if you want to add some forced texture in a few places, drop in a few droplets of water. This is just clean water, and it will create little puddles and backgrounds. All right, so now you have to let that whole thing dry, and then we're gonna come back and do our whale. All right, we're back and everything is dry. Now, I went and got my table salt, so just regular table salt would be great to have on hand, and you don't have to use it at all if you don't want to. But we're going to do something similar with the whole top of the body, where it's going to be darker around the edges, darker under the fin here, but lighter in the middle, and we're going to add salt to it, and we're going to create these really fun textures, which just add this element of texture, I guess. You know, it makes that the skin of the whale look very rough, and but at the same time like really interesting. Look at that. All right, so we're going to try to recreate that. We're going to use Phthalo blue and Payne's gray. So this is Phthalo blue green shade. I'm going to add some Payne's gray to it. You could use just straight phthalo blue if you wanted to. And actually I have two versions now, so I added some phthalo blue to my Payne's gray and some Payne's gray to my phthalo blue. And now I have two versions, which is great. All right, so I'm going to take this and I am going to start, and this is very blue, along the edge here. And I want things to be nice and wet. I don't want to paint with little water and little paint. I want to keep it nice and wet. I'm going to work around the eye. And I'm just going to add water down here and blend it out towards the belly, towards the fin. We'll add darker color on the fin in just a moment. But you need everything to stay wet. All right, I'm going to add a little darker color towards the bottom of the fin here. And we'll get to these other sections. But for right now. Okay, and now I'm going to take my salt and I am going to generously sprinkle it along the areas that I want this texture to appear. You can just sprinkle it all over the place. You can try to keep it localized, but remember, you don't have too much control over this. Salt kind of goes everywhere. Okay, so we're going to let that dry naturally on its own. You don't want to use a dryer with it, because what the salt is going to do is basically it's going to suck up water and pull paint and water with it, and that's what's going to create the texture. Once it's dry, you just brush the salt off. Okay, we're going to do this fin underneath. Similarly, we're going to make it a little darker. Phthalo blue and Payne's gray again. That's a lot darker. Just rinse off my brush. There we go. Just because it's underneath, kind of in shadow. I'm not going to worry about salt on this. Just a little. There we go. Oh, and I can already see the salt working. It's looking great. Okay, so now we got to do the underside, this kind of under jaw mouth area. And I want this to be more gray than anything else. It's going to have a hint of blue to it, but it's definitely going to be on the grayer side a little bit. So we added lots of Payne's gray to this already blue phthalo mixture, and then I'm going to lighten it up because we're going to add a few layers. So I am going to add this layer. And after this, we are going to add other layers of the texture for these lines here, and also shadow under the main top of the mouth to make it look separate. And then we're going to do our eye. Isn't this a fun project? Kind of let loose a little bit. So right now I'm just going to drop in more color along. This isn't going to be the final shadow, but we'll make it just a little darker along the top there. And we're going to let that dry as well before we go back and add more texture. Look at what that salt is doing. I got really a little carried away. I put a lot of salt on here, so almost looks like a leopard kind of spots thing. Usually I keep it somewhat localized to like the top section and a little bit in the bottom and leave the middle alone. I sprinkled it everywhere, but still looks super cool. Look at that. Okay, let's do our eye. You want everything around it to be dry, and I think we're dry enough there. I'm going to go with my little tiny cheapo craft brush, but it's got a great point on it. Do I think this brush is going to last forever? No. I'll probably get like a month out of it before it starts to break down, but it works. It works for now. We are going to use Payne's Gray for most of this. I am actually going to pull in a tiny little bit of yellow. So whatever yellow you have on hand, I have a Diarylide yellow here in my palette. I'll just put that out there, just a little smidge, just for kind of the white part of the eye. I don't want it to be fully white. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put in my pupil. So that's the innermost inner circle, and I am going to leave a little white spot for the highlight. If you don't leave the white spot and you mess it up, you can get some bleed proof white or some acrylic if you have it on hand and just put a tiny little dot on there. But having a little highlight is very helpful. All right, I am also going to I'm going to start to put the lid on here, this heavy lid. So I'm just using Payne's Gray right now. I am going to go back in with some blue. I'm going to outline kind of the bottom, halfway there. I'm going to rinse off my brush and I'm going to blend that out to be a little softer so he doesn't look like he has eyeliner on. And you can see I'm leaving white parts outside here. So the pupil is in, but the iris part around it is not. And then there's the white. So it's outline, white. It's going to be the iris. We're going to put a little yellow there and then black for the pupil. It's really easy to get lost in there. So you want things to be mostly dry. I'm adding a little yellow color in here. Just a smidge and let that dry. And then even in the white part, we can add very light touches of little bits of gray where there's shadow. And now let's take some dark blue. I'm going to put that over the lid and kind of create this hooded lid feel. There we go. And I can let it dry and then decide if I need to put any more detail on there. All right. And you can close it up and make it smaller or make the pupil kind of more hooded with the top line of the eyelid to give it that kind of soulful, old soul kind of look. All right, this is mostly dry. I'm going to come back in here with my detail brush And we are going to add Payne's Gray. And actually this brush is a little too small for this part. I should switch to, what do I have here? 6 or 4 would work here. And then I'm going to start to bring this down in lines this way to create that texture. And depending on the shape that you make here will definitely change the expression of your whale. I'm trying not to make it look like he's smiling, because I noticed that's kind of where we were going for a minute there. But you could have a smiling whale. All right, so I'm going to let that dry and add a few more lines with a more detailed brush on top. And we're going to pull our salt off soon. This is still a little wet down here, but it's definitely dry kind of right here, so it's just flaking off with that really cool texture. I love it. All right, so let it dry one more time and we'll come back and put on some final details. All right, we're almost done. I totally realized I forgot to paint this back here, the other part of the fin, so I'm just going to take some Phthalo and some Payne's Gray and put that in. And it can definitely be a slightly different color than the other because it's at a different angle. It's kind of moving away from us. Put a little darker color right towards the edge here, like where it meets the other fin. Wet on wet. The other half of the fin, it's kind of sideways. There we go. All right, and last but not least, let's take our detail brush, some more of this dark color. I'm just gonna put a few final, almost dry brush, not quite, I do want it to actually, there we go. But this detail brush, it doesn't hold a lot of water and paint, so you have to reload it almost like every stroke or every other stroke. Actually, I'm going to take some blue and add it in here. There we go. All right, there is our whale. This is going to lighten up a little bit as it continues to dry. Let's take off our tape though and see those nice clean lines. This is always super satisfying because you have a very messy border. And then when you take this off, it really just frames the whole thing so nicely. Everything starts to pop and glow. So there is our whale. Thank you so much for joining me. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so, share it with a friend, leave a comment. I love your comments, whether it's questions or just comments on the actual piece, things you liked, things you thought were interesting or would like to do differently or that you did differently. Always helpful to others, I think, and to me for sure. Share with a friend, and I will see you again very soon for our next watercolor journal page. Thanks, y'all. Take care and happy painting.